Talking about. So there's a chance for you to exit the room now, or if you're watching it on the film, then clearly you can just switch it off. I'm not going to be talking about a change of name subject for religious education. Some of you might have heard that there's words going around about changing the name to religion and worldviews. You can do that if you wish, but that's not what I'm talking about. Because a worldviews approach is about an approach. It's not about a change of name. I'm also clearly, because Nancy has been presenting about what it is you're going to be teaching, the stuff if you like, clearly I'm not going to be telling you what to teach. I don't work in a Catholic school, I'm not involved in the Catholic sector in that way, so I'm not going to be talking about stuff, I'm not talking about a change to what it is that you teach. And lastly, just to be really clear, that when we talk about a worldviews approach, I'm not talking just about non-religious worldviews, talking about religious and non-religious worldviews. And very helpfully, I spied in Nancy's presentation earlier, when she had that kind of concentric circles, that at the top it said other religious and non-religious worldviews. So what I'm talking about is an approach. So, what do we mean by a worldview? Well, there are so many different definitions, if you like, of worldview out there, but I'm just going to pick out a couple of things for you. And I'm going to be referring, I've picked out some bits specifically from the RED with some page numbers. I just want to say that this was taken from the pre-print version, so you might find that the page numbers are not identical, okay? But the text, it didn't change after this point, so the text that you've got there is exactly the same. So, it's absolutely clear in the RED that everyone has a worldview. So if you can't read that there, it says, all people, whether consciously or unconsciously, hold a worldview. So it's really clear right there in the RED. Each of us goes out into the world upon a vision, discerning meaning in it, drawing on deep moral sources, entering relationship, joining in common cause, acting from a general framework about how things are and what is worth pursuing. And then that's the bit highlighted in green. It then goes on to say, religious education allows all pupils to discern for themselves the vision of reality that motivates the shape they will give to their own lives. I really love this phrase. Obviously it was a collective creation, but I think this is a fantastic description of what it means to have a worldview. And this aligns really well with the Commission on RE report from 2018, which talks about everybody having a worldview. Something on which you are basing your life, you're making sense of what it is that surrounds you. And it also aligns with development work building on the Commission on RE, which is being led by Stephen Pett, who works for RE Today. And there are 3 teams at the moment of curriculum writers who are looking more widely at what a worldviews approach might look like in terms of curriculum development. So, I'm not going to show this film now, partly because we're limited for time, but there is a great little animation, and Philip actually showed this animation at this conference in 2021. It's called Nobody Stands Nowhere. And it's a great little film to use in school. It's available on YouTube. It's produced by Theos think tank, and it's also on the St Gabriel's RE Online website as well. I'm going to refer to some of the resources that go with it later. But this is a great way in to everyone understanding that we all have a position that we are coming from. Nobody's neutral, okay? There's no such thing as a neutral position. We're all coming from somewhere. And this lies very much at the heart of a worldviews approach. Ooh. So, quick question for you, and because of time I'm only going to give you literally about a minute to think about this question or to have a quick conversation with somebody next to you. When you hear, you might have heard this phrase before, when you hear the phrase a worldviews approach, what might come to mind? Okay, so this might be things that you've heard, things that you've seen. What comes to mind from your perspective? So literally about a minute or two, either just reflect on it yourself or have a quick conversation with someone. I'm not going to be taking lots of feedback, okay? This is just for you to think.
Up to now, not overarching a little bit concerned branch areas of argument, a lot of concern, worry, all those things she said it's not, changing the context, trying to bring it up. I've had a lot from that side. Interestingly, last night, he was arguing that constant sense, be inclusive and both the way, reminding people you can't just check yourself out of our room by saying, well, everything you've got, everything doesn't apply to you. So, from that perspective, much more very positive side. It's interesting both sides of it. I'll be interested to find out where all the
What I would like you to do is to just put your hand up, put your hands up if any of these things came up in those very quick conversations. Did you think about, so on the first side there, it's an approach which emphasises hermeneutics, okay, which I'm going to unpack a little bit more in a minute, intellectual humility and dialogue, reflexivity, wise or critical interpretation, and we could actually use the word discernment there, personal knowledge and positionality. On that side, any of those things coming up in your conversations just now, just raise a hand if any of those things came up. Okay, a few people. Okay, great. And then on the other side, we've got this approach takes seriously lived authentic experience, a diversity of belief and practice, continuity and change over time, context, and different ways of knowing. Did any of those things come up? Okay, more on that side. Okay, that's really interesting. So, a worldviews approach is about both of these things. It's about an emphasis on particular ways in which we might be teaching the subject. Okay, it's an approach. But an approach also can include the way you frame some of the content. And although I said I'm not talking specifically about changing content or anything, it's about reframing, reimagining some of the ways in which we might approach that. Okay, and so it's interesting that more of you had talked about this side of things here. Okay, and what I want to show you, hopefully in a minute, after you've had another very quick conversation, is that the RED, my looking at it, actually touches on nearly all of those things there, actually. Okay, that there's real alignment between the two. And I just want to have a caveat, and this is on film, I have shown Philip Robinson my presentation beforehand. So, and he was very warm and welcoming of it, so I was very pleased about that. So, just from what Nancy said this morning already about the directory, what connections can you perhaps immediately see from the previous slide, and I'll maybe go back to the previous slide, with what Nancy has shared this morning? What immediate connections can you perhaps make at this point? So I'll go back to the previous slide, another quick minute's conversation. What connections can you immediately see perhaps between the two? Okay, off you go. So, minute conversation. Just to say, obviously, the slides will be available as well afterwards, so don't feel you've got to make loads and loads of notes, okay? So, just by a show of sort of hands or nods, could everyone see a connection of some kind? Okay, that's great. So all I'm going to really do is just pull some of those things out and then give some examples of resources and things that particularly Cullen St Gabriel's have got available for you to use for free that will support some of these aspects. Just before I do that, I do have a caveat. This whole idea of a worldviews approach, or religion and worldviews approach, is a work in progress. Okay, this picture here, this draft resource, is what Stephen Pett and a team are working on and developing the work that was initially sort of thought about in the Commission and RE. So it's a work in progress. This is tentative thinking and application at this stage. Okay, so in a sense it's experimental. I believe that it's a shifting paradigm in terms of a religion and worldviews approach to religious education. But it can be very easy, and I do this still, to fall back into a world religions approach. I'm not going to go into that into detail, I don't have time now. But sometimes our lack of kind of understanding or awareness of what a worldviews approach is really about can mean that sometimes we just kind of drop back into thinking about RE in a world religions way. And the other thing I would say is it's important to engage with this thinking even if you're not sure about it, or even perhaps if you disagree with it. It's important to engage with the conversations that are going on. Okay? So, this is my take then on how a worldviews approach is relevant to Catholic schools. The first thing I have done is go to look at the aims in the RED. You obviously won't be able to read those all there, but this is a summary of some of those aims. The aims in the RED are about systematic study, about religious and theological understanding, about authentic understanding, about respectful and fruitful dialogue, like a critical approach, and about personal meaning. All of those things there are actually really, really well aligned with a worldviews approach to religious education. We want systematic study, we clearly want religious and theological understanding. I mentioned earlier that it's about authenticity, authentic understanding of religion and belief. Obviously about dialogue, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it being critical, a critical approach. And Nancy really, I thought put Julius out brilliant this morning, it's about personal meaning, that response element. So it aligns really well with the general aims. So what about the outcome then? And again, I love this summary of an outcome of religious education. Again, I just, in the big writing at the bottom there, highlighted the key things there. That we want children and young people to be religiously literate, consciously engaged, reflecting spiritually and thinking ethically and theologically. And again, this is exactly what a worldviews approach is also looking for. So there's a complete alignment there. So what about some of the specifics? Well, what I've done, I think this is the section, the first section is that Paul's going to speak a little bit about this afternoon. what I've done is just to pick out some of the key parts in that first bit of the RE directory and thought about how do these things align with the worldviews approach, and to give you some examples. So, Article 4 says RE is at the heart of the curriculum and there's a focus on academic / scholarly nature of study, embracing multiple disciplines. If I didn't know that that sentence was in the RE directory, I could say that that most likely is very similarly written about in the draft resource I mentioned earlier, which is looking specifically about developing this approach. Then, two other paragraphs. RE is generally educational, including reference to embracing disciplinarity, growing in wisdom, and critical and respectful dialogue. And then a pluralistic curriculum includes importance of authenticity in dialogue, encountering others, and reference to all having a world view. Okay. So what I'm going to do is take each of those and give you some examples. Some more specific examples. Okay, so first of all, what might scholarly study mean? From a worldviews approach perspective, it means embracing multiple disciplines. Now, we've talked already, or I've talked in passing, about theology, theology as a discipline. Multiple disciplines means thinking about other disciplinary areas, like perhaps a more philosophical approach, or perhaps a more historical approach, or a more social science approach, something like anthropology, for example, or political kind of approach. So there are many different ways in which we might study religion and worldviews. And it's about embracing some of these different ways in which we might look and study religion. Clearly, the theological one is particularly important. That's my sense anyway. I can stand to be corrected, but my sense is that's a particularly important one in your context. And what worldviews approach is saying, yes, we also think that that's important alongside other ways of thinking about religion. The importance of hermeneutics, and this links to the third point about becoming wise interpreters. Hermeneutics is basically about interpretation, and it acknowledges that we all come from a position when we are engaging with a text or a piece of art or a piece of music or some other scholarly piece of information, that we all come with a position and that we are then interpreting that. Great analogy given to me once was that basically a piece of text is kind of inert, basically, until you engage with it. Yeah, it's nothing until you, as a person, engage with that. And I think it's a great analogy of what we mean by hermeneutics. It also means that we bring ourselves to the study. Again, another little anecdote. Some years ago, my husband and I went to the Chelsea Flower Show. We stayed in a hotel not too far away, which was near the Natural History Museum. Now, my husband didn't know it was near the Natural History Museum. His knowledge of London was less advanced, that's not quite the word I wanted it, he knew less about the London landscape. Anyway, so in the restaurant where we had breakfast, there was this big mural of dinosaurs across the wall. And we sat down and he went, "What is that about?" I went, "What do you mean what's about? The Natural History Museum's up the road." But I had brought my prior knowledge, my understanding, to this big mural, and it made perfect sense to me why it was there. So I interpreted that because of what I brought to it. He had no idea the Natural History Museum was like totally random as far as he was concerned, because he didn't bring that prior knowledge. He brought a different experience to it, which was that he didn't have knowledge of that. So we become wise interpreters. We bring ourselves to the text. Then we're also thinking about different perspectives, perhaps, that are being brought to a text, particularly about text, but it could be other things that you come to. And then actively discerning, so making judgments about things, making wise decisions about what it is that we're looking at. So and this is all exactly what a worldviews approach is exploring. So here are some examples for you. I'm not going to click through to these, but you'll be able to do that afterwards. These are all on ATCRE Online. The first one is the visual commentary on scripture, which is a big project being done through, I think it's one of the universities in London. And they're basically looking at trying to map the entire Bible through art, and then adding commentary to that, and you can use it in a classroom. What a brilliant resource that would be. Then Jen Jenkins, who works for the Diocese of Coventry, the Anglican Diocese of Coventry, has done some great work on introducing hermeneutics through her work with schools, and her work also is across phase as well. She's also written some blogs for ATCRE Online about hermeneutical approach. And then the last one there is a more historical approach to the study of religion. It's just an example of how in a particular town what happened in the past has impacted what's happened now in the present day. Okay, it's just an example there. So you can click through those afterwards. So the second element then to focus on is this critical, respectful dialogue. And what I've done here is just to pull out again some of the phrases from the RED, and then just show that in this draft resource, this is the one again that Stephen Pett has produced, and it is draft, how it almost says exactly the same thing. Okay, so again they're completely aligned there. So respecting one's own identity and that of others, the courage to recognise difference and embrace those who are different as fellow travellers, and then journeying with fellow travellers. So being respectful of other people, understanding one's own position and how that might connect with other people. And I love this one here from the draft resource. Self-awareness of our own assumptions. We're then better able to identify, interpret and understand the worldviews of others. Okay. So here are some examples of some resources and things that might support with that area. So on ATCRE Online we have a section called Telling My Story. This is where the Nobody Stands Nowhere film sits as well. But what we have done is asked some different people who have different personal worldviews to share their story. Connects really nicely with what Nancy said earlier about story. And there's a whole range of people here. So Jackie, Shami, Esther, Debbie, Zamir, Bob. They all come from different perspectives. And some of them have what we might call complex worldviews. So they have drawn on different religious and non-religious traditions, okay? And that's what makes their worldview now. Some of them have had a worldview that's changed over time, so they've maybe moved between different, what we might call organised worldview perspectives. So, and they're all available to download, and you can use those in the classroom. And then this other area about dialogue and encounter, which again Nancy mentioned briefly this morning. I just quoted the bit there from the RED, which talks about pupils learning how Christians work together with people of different religious convictions and all people of goodwill towards the common good, respecting the dignity of all humanity. So this, again, important element of the RED. And here are some examples of resources and so on that can be there to help you to do that. We have an area on ATCRE Online that's called Voices from Religion and Worldviews. Now, this has been created over some significant amount of time. where individuals have responded to common questions that children and young people ask in schools, and then we basically compiled them. So this is the Jewish worldview tradition example, and for each of these questions there are actually at least 2 responses. So one from a Jew who has a more orthodox position, and one from a Jew who has more of a reformed position. And they just answer these questions from their perspective as individuals. So you get the diversity within a different worldview tradition, and you're also getting a personal perspective as well. And we've got that not just for Jewish worldview traditions, but for most of the main principal religions, and also for humanism as well. So, you know, they're just great little resources where you're getting an individual person's perspective. The other element with the worldviews approach is that it sees itself as transformational in nature. And again, I think this sits really well with the RED. This is a blog, it's actually a little bit, it's quite old now, it's from 2020, written by a teacher in a Catholic secondary school, where she talks about the importance of reflexivity. So how we bring oneself to learning, and then we learn from that. Okay, so it develops our own personal knowledge, our own personal worldview. And I think this is really key in relation particularly to that discerning and responding element in terms of outcomes for young people in Catholic schools. And the worldviews approach is doing the same sort of thing. So, a little summary before I want to give you a slightly different analogy for you to have a think about. So, in summary then, what might this worldviews approach look like, or how is it relevant for Catholic RE? The first thing is approaching the study of text hermeneutically. So, as children and young people, as interpreters of religion, ensuring theological study is robust and scholarly. Then being attentive to the positionality of the different pupils in your class, and perhaps your own positionality as well, and keeping that in mind, that RE does not, as the RED says, assume a sense of faith. Then enabling the pupils to become wise interpreters and discerners of Catholic traditions, as well as other religious and non-religious worldviews. And then ensuring pupils engage with authentic lived experience of other religious and non-religious worldviews. One of the things that particularly struck me again this morning was the opportunity for children to engage with their local context, with the community that you're actually in, so that they engage with people who are perhaps living a Catholic worldview in the local area, but perhaps might be living a different worldview as well, in engaging with that authentic experience. And then giving due attention to the diversity within the Catholic tradition. Although I'm not a Catholic, I'm sure many of you in the room may well be, but probably your own experience of the Catholic tradition might not be exactly the same. So being aware of that. As a Christian who has kind of Anglican roots, but more recently has been at a Baptist church, I remember somebody sharing something in a lesson when I was at school, and talking about the Christian tradition, and me thinking, well, that's not my experience of it. So it's really important, and particularly perhaps increasingly, we've got a number of schools who have Ukrainian children, for example, in particular, but from other places across the world, where they may well come from a Catholic tradition, and it's being aware of some of that diversity as well, and being enriched by it. I think, you know, it's an opportunity for enrichment. So I want to give you a little analogy at the end here, as I begin to bring things to a little bit of a close. And this analogy is around hospitable spaces. In 2017-18, I finished my own research, so a picture of it there, and I used a theology of hospitality to think about what were the best ways of teaching RE in Church of England schools. At that time I was working as a diocesan advisor. And I used this theology of hospitality to approach that. And more recently I have revisited it because I think it helps us to understand perhaps what a worldviews approach might look like in, perhaps, I offer to you, in Catholic schools, but certainly I think in Church of England schools. So I'm just going to touch on this very briefly, and there are 4 points there I want to make. And hopefully I'll be finished on time. So the first one is, if we think about hospitality, I think it provides an ontological approach. So when we are hosting people, we bring ourselves to that space as the host. So it's about being the teacher. It's about your presence in the classroom. Hospitality is about the physical space, but it's far more about who we are and how we serve. Teachers and pupils bring themselves and their own worldview and position to the classroom. So it's like we're hosting our young people in the classroom. The second thing is that it's inclusive. Hospitality, in the way I understand it from a Christian theological point of view, seeks to intentionally include those on the margins, perhaps those that are different to us, listening and engaging with voices of those often unheard. And I think this resonates really well with some of the conversations about decolonising the curriculum as well, and with a focus on lived experiences of worldview communities. Thirdly, hospitality is relational in nature. It involves hosts and guests. A particular feature of my research is that the host can also be the guest and vice versa. I think this is expanded really well, I've got time to go into it now, in the story of the road to Emmaus, where Jesus is the guest and then becomes the host. Speaking at the moment, obviously I'm being hosted here by people with you, as part of your conference today. So I believe this removes the power dynamic, this idea of host-guest, and facilitates genuine dialogue and conversation in the classroom. It also places you as the teacher in a position of humility, where you are serving your pupils and at the same time may be served by them or from them. So I love this idea of relationship in the classroom. It also acknowledges, of course, that everyone has a worldview which is to be valued. And lastly, hospitality is by nature participatory. One can't stand on the sidelines and observe, or if one did, it might appear very rude. One must take part, eat, drink, chat. An analogy I found helpful is from ancient Greek drama. Unlike the Greeks, we tend to see knowledge as something other than ourselves, something out there. We are, if you like, spectators of a play. We tend to relate to it from the perspective of an audience. However, the Greek audiences were able to put themselves in the play to participate within it. And I believe teachers and pupils are to be in community with what they are learning. This, for me, is what lies at the heart of a worldviews approach. One brings oneself to the subject, participating in it ontologically, relationally, and inclusively from a position of humility. So I offer this, if you're interested, my PhD is available online if you want to go and read it all. But this quote I'm putting up here really, for me, sums up what a worldviews approach could be about in a setting where it's school with a religious character. Because it's saying I'll let you read it. What it's saying, I think, well, for me, what it's saying is that actually we want to embrace others. It enriches us. It doesn't have to change us and our beliefs, our values, or any of those things, but actually we're open to the other, and that experience enriches us. Miroslav Volf is a Protestant theologian, and this is from one of his famous texts called Exclusion and Embrace. So, I will leave you with a question to ponder, perhaps over lunch, and then finally, just with a couple of places where you might want to, if you want to find out more about religion and worldviews approach, this is the ATCRE Online website. That's the research page where you can find out more, particularly if you want to look at some of the texts and things I've referred to. But also, if you want to do a little bit of learning yourself about religion and worldviews, we have 3 online courses as well at this website, and there are 2 in particular that are about what does a religion and worldviews approach mean, but also courses on research, and we've actually got a new one now, which is down here, called Introduction to Subject Knowledge. So there we go. Probably got about a minute for questions.